Good evening. My name is Ellen Cooper. I'm the Chair of Legislation. I'm going to call this meeting to order and we're reading the notice. Board of Alders notice in New Haven. The Legislation Committee of the Board of Alders will meet in person on Tuesday, October 1st, 2024 at 6 o'clock p.m. in the Board of Alders chamber located at 165 Church Street, second floor, New Haven, Connecticut, to hear and act on the following items. 1. LM-2024-0271, order of the New Haven Board of Alders calling for a workshop on the potential role of tiny homes, pallet shelters, and other similar structures in meeting the immediate needs of New Haven's unhoused residents. 2. OR-2024-0022, ordinance amendment to Title 6 of the City of New Haven's Code of Ordinances, Flood Damage Prevention Ordinance, to correct an error in the definition of substantial improvement and update provisions for above ground tanks, fill and dry flood proofing for non-residential structures to align with the Uniform Building Code of the State of Connecticut. Per order, Honorable Ellen Kupo, Chair, attest Honorable Michael Smart, City Town Clerk. These items are on file and available in the office of the City Clerk located at 200 Orange Street, room 202, New Haven, Connecticut, 06510. For accessibility related accommodations, please call 203-946-7651 or 203-946-8582. Public comment testimony may also be submitted via email to publictestimony@newhavenctt.gov before 2 p.m. on the day of the meeting. This meeting may be viewed on New Haven Board of Alders YouTube page. I want to welcome everyone in chambers this evening, and I'm going to start by taking the roll in alphabetical order. So I, Ellen Cooper, I am here. Alder Furlow.
Present.
Alder Mershon.
Here.
Alder Morrison. Alder Carmen Rodriguez.
Here.
Alder Evelyn Rodriguez.
Present.
Alder Siddon.
Here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to my colleagues who are here this evening. And we will begin with item number 1. And I'll ask if city staff who are here to present on this item would please come forward. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you.
Good evening. If you please introduce each of yourselves and state your name and address for the record, and then you'll begin your presentation with this workshop.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time tonight. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Michael Piscatelli. I reside at 353 Summit Street in New Haven. I'm the Economic Development Administrator of the city.
Good evening, Laura Brown. I'm the Director of the City Planning Department. I reside at 262 West Rock Avenue in New Haven.
I'm Nate Hugren. I'm the Deputy Director of Zoning of the City Planning Department, and I reside at 191 Worcester Street.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Eliza Halsey, Community Services Administrator, and I reside at Marple Wood.
Good evening, Dylan, Director of OBIE, 632 Woodward Avenue.
Just want to start by thanking you for the time tonight. Thank you as members of the Board of Alders for the governing mission around providing housing in a community and a state that has a arguably a very desperate need, recognizing the gap of about 90,000 housing units statewide that we need to build. And the anguish that causes quite a few of our neighbors and residents when housing prices are going up. And yet the economy is healthy. There's, there are jobs here in the city. It's a really important time and meaningful time in our community, and yet there are incredible stress factors around housing. We'll start with some table setting and then get into the topic today around smaller format, small healthy homes, we'll call them. Hope to answer some questions about what we're learning on this journey about smaller format homes. There are people here tonight, so we'll be around for Q&A as well. But just to give you kind of a sense of what's happening, city has led the state in new housing production right through the pandemic, averaging about 500 new housing units per year over the past decade. 500 permits issued already this year, so significantly ahead of the state, not nearly enough to accommodate the need. With interest rates starting to loosen up a little bit, we're starting to see the market, the private market, private market developments that don't necessarily involve the city outside of code review or zoning or something. It's finally starting to reappear. So a project like 19 Elm Street, which is a market rate project, 96 units, that may not speak exactly to the affordability need, but more housing generally will help unlock the supply. So let's say you could afford a unit in 19 Elm Street, you don't feel the pressure to go to a different unit, a lower price unit or something like that, and put downward pressure on the market. So these market rate projects are really, really important. Board's been very supportive of our efforts to build on parking lots. So the State Street project, which is what we call Parcel A and Parcel B over on State Street, these are just regular urban renewal parking lots, which the market is showing interest in. Really excited to get that project off the ground. We selected great development partners, Glendower on George Street, and a company called Gilbane together with Zenolith on State Street. The State Street project is just about ready for a community conversation. So we have some internal work to do, kind of get it a little bit more organized. But we're north of 500 units, hopefully, with those two projects, and just again unlocking where we can without displacement by building on parking lots. And then consistent with our governing mission around creating wealth, we actually have two home ownership projects that are moving forward. You'll hear much more about this from Olivia Samuel and our team on the housing and neighborhood side. One is the next phase in the Thompson-Winchester area of New Hallville. That's 19 units in this phase, 15 which will be made available to homeowners, and there'll be 4 rental units. And then over in Fairhaven, you were very supportive of us. We tried to acquire those townhouses next to Fairhaven Health. And that project is about 90% designed. And so we look to go into construction of that next year. That's 6 units, 3 of which will be homeowner units, and then the rental will be upstairs. So, and I say this all maybe in the context of all of the above, right? Like all of the above. And our presentation tonight will speak to the next real area of inquiry for the city, which is in smaller format, healthy homes, recognizing either because of cost or land availability or just the sheer need, we've got to expand our horizon into other areas. Share with you a presentation. The team, which is assembled here today, is largely technical. So we're going to talk about this from all of the different codes: zoning, building, policy, which is why I'm really grateful that Eliza was able to join us today. And then it's all 12 slides, so we give a lot of time for the questions and making raising.
Okay, does everyone have a copy of the slides? Okay, great. So I'll do, again, Laura Brown, I'm Director of the City Planning Department, a little bit more of the kind of background and how we're understanding small, healthy homes. And again, we wanted to leave a lot of time for questions, knowing that you all may be coming here with different lenses and different thoughts about what you'd like to get answered tonight. So we do have a slide in the American Rescue Plan for our community. As you know, this fits, these discussions, as Mike mentioned, fit within the agenda that the city has been pursuing for many years, addressing the crisis around housing and also creating, laying the groundwork for our future as a growing city. So we wanted to put that into context. Tonight, we have some examples of what we've described as small, healthy homes. And we're giving it that lens because it's kind of a big realm of options that could be built to address the housing crisis and some of these needs. We would like to talk a little bit about our regulatory path forward and some of those regulatory and policy agendas you're familiar with in the form of the revision to the ADU ordinance, some maybe things that we would consider in the future, but also some of the program work that we've been working on, and really to answer your questions about the pros and cons of these various types of options. There may be things that you don't see here tonight that we could discuss. We welcome those conversations as well. So again, just to kind of reframe around small, healthy homes, this is really thinking about this, the housing crisis more broadly, and small, healthy homes being one approach. So the way that we're thinking about those is really smaller format houses on smaller lots. And we'll give you some options. Let's move on to slide 5. So I'm going to move on to this back slide. So here you'll see kind of what we've outlined as some of the key kind of typologies, I'll say, of small healthy homes. And the idea here is that smaller construction can be more affordable, particularly because it's smaller, uses less materials, can be built on smaller lots, but is also more efficient to live in. So that's one way that these could be more naturally affordable. But these, if you can kind of envision what these could look like, could take the form of cottages, smaller homes within a small community of smaller starter homes. And we have these types of homes already in the city of New Haven in various places. So sort of starter home format. Let's talk about accessory dwelling units. So a key component of accessory dwelling units, when we think about what those are, is that they must be secondary to a primary structure. So they don't exist alone on a single parcel. And that's what makes them accessory. These can be 400 square feet up to 1,200 square feet. And the way that they are formatted, allowable now within our zoning ordinance, is that they must be within an existing structure. So they can be an attic, they can be a basement, they can be a garage conversion, but they cannot be an addition and they cannot be a separate new building. So in phases 2 and 3, we've presented some of those changes, and we can get into some of that if you'd like to discuss the options in phase 2 and 3. Tiny homes are permanent principal structures on the lot, so that's one distinguishing feature. The structure itself is 400 square feet or more. It's built on a slab foundation or could be mobile. But these are homes, so they must meet all the elements of the building code, as we know here. And that we wanted to distinguish from emergency shelters, which are really intended for short-term use, not permanent shelters. They're usually prefabricated, and they can be used for a variety of needs, from addressing homelessness crises to natural disasters, or other reasons people might be displaced from their residence. So,
Director Brown,
yeah.
if you don't mind, I just wanted to welcome and acknowledge our colleagues who are in the audience, Alder Miller, Alder Dante, and Alder Douglas. Thank you for being here. Stay.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Deputy Director Zoning who's going to talk a little bit about the ADU ordinance as it stands and what we've proposed, just to reorient you to that.
Thank you. So if you go to the next slide, ADU phase 1 adopted. As Laura mentioned, you might be familiar with some of these, but as it's enacted now, it's currently section 22 in our ordinance, and it's permitted in the RS1, RS2, RM1, and RM2 zones, with the parcel needing to be a minimum of 4,000 square feet. An ADU can only be located within the existing structure, with the unit being no less than 400 and no more than 1,200 square feet. Laura mentioned that as well previously. And it requires the property to be owner occupied, with no off-street parking requirement. Currently, we've had 11 ADUs that were permitted with relief, so they went through the Board of Zoning Appeals to get various variances, mainly due to the owner occupancy requirement. As of right now, only one's been constructed, but none have been done solely through the building permit process. Every single one's required some form of approval from the Board of Zoning Appeals. So if you go to the next slide, proposed ordinance implements phases 2 and 3. So originally when we implemented the ADU ordinance, it was seen as a 3-phase approach. However, the most recent submittal that we did kind of combined phase 2 and 3 into one submission. So that was earlier this year. We submitted that with the objective being to lessen some of the restrictions that are currently within the ordinance, such as removing the owner occupancy and minimum lot size requirements. It would allow ADUs to be created through new construction and additions to existing structures, and would allow a greater building height than what's currently allowed. There would still be no parking requirement, but accessibility requirements were added for ground level units. And then once an ADU is established, a parcel cannot be subdivided into a way where the ADU would become its own structure.
Before we turn it over to Eliza and talk a little bit about where we might see the benefits and where this can go down the road, we should note tiny houses, which Laura mentioned in broad scope, is actually a defined term. It's a proper name, not just sort of a colloquial name, defined in the International Residential Code. So maybe Bobby can just talk a little bit about what the basic standards are for a tiny house.
Yeah, so, good evening. A tiny home is in an appendix, comes right out of the building code. So in the Connecticut State Building Code, we actually have language, and it's actually one page, and it gives relief. So that's, that seems to be like the biggest thing, is where do you get the relief? So tiny homes allow for lower ceiling heights. Your typical IRC building, and that's a single family home, is a 7-foot ceiling. You can go down to 6'10" in a tiny home. These are reliefs, and you can also have a 35 square foot bedroom as opposed to a 70 square foot bedroom through the tiny home appendix. And in the R code compliant buildings, they still have to meet all the pieces and parts of a single family house, which would be separate sewer bathrooms. But there is relief in the chapter for in the appendix for the tiny homes. That's kind of where it goes. So if you wouldn't have, you can get 400 square feet as well. It'd be the minimum size. So it does give you some advantage.
Madam Chair, if I may, and I know we don't normally interrupt, so thank you for this courtesy. If you can just give us where that is in the code, because we don't have a copy of that, and then we could pull it up and read it.
It's appendix, I believe it's appendix Q in the International Residential Code. Really talk about.
Oh, it's not in our code. It's not in our zoning.
It's not a zoning
Oh,
code.
the state.
It's a state building code, it's appendix AQ. And the whole chapter is literally tiny houses. And so if you look in the beginning of that, it gives you the whole scope, gives you the definition. And then it starts to go with, for ceiling heights, it gives you some down as low as 6'8" for ceiling heights. It allows you to put like a sleeping unit up in a loft, and it would be only 35 square feet, which again gives you more relief.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the courtesy.
Of course.
But there is a pathway, and it's clearly defined, which again makes it more advantage than a typical single family house.
And then maybe Eliza, you could talk a little bit about, some of the areas where we might see applicability and real benefit in our community.
Sure. Yes, I know a number of you heard in the Health and Human Services Committee last week from our team within CSA, which has looked at the possibility of tiny homes as an opportunity, really in the context of potential community of tiny homes, as defined in the presentation earlier. And I think sort of three main benefits there include additional affordable housing for residents, particularly for elderly residents, which currently comprise a large percentage of our unhoused population, and really thinking about elderly residents 55 and up who are transitioning from sometimes larger units and looking for smaller space. So there is potential opportunity there. The other piece of exploring tiny homes, multiple tiny homes in one location, allows the chance to and potential to build support services, in addition to community around those types of structures. So this is something that we've talked broadly about. There are no immediate plans for, but our team has looked at different models across the country. And as Mike opened with, there's certainly a need for more deeply affordable housing, and this could be a solution there. So I'll end with that, but certainly open to questions related to services or the types of work that the Office of Housing and Homeless Services.
Thank you, CSA Housing. I want to recognize Alder Morrison as the welcome.
So we'll close by saying it's a bit of a journey, right? We're going at a certain pace. Phase 2 and phase 3 of the ADUs are pending at the Board of Alders, and I think this hopefully informs where we want to take that and where it might be applicable. In the interim, as I think you all know, but worth restating, there are resources through CSA for people experiencing homelessness right now or at risk. We have a balance still in our security deposit assistance fund. So if you're displaced from your unit and then you're faced with this, you got to pay first and last deposit. Our staff is still processing those applications. Projects you've supported in the past, like Cofield Estates and Ashman and Canal, are now leasing up. So if you know people looking for a unit, this is the time to get an application in, because they're really leasing. It's the first wave of applications that they're processing. And both of those projects have a deeply affordable component. So if you know people, they're flyers, they're posted. But if people are struggling with it, Candace in our office handles the assistance for people that are looking to rent in either of those two places. Good place to pause and maybe answer any questions. And I know you've got other testimony tonight, so we'll be here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. This is actually my communication, so I have, if we could just maybe back, and I don't want to talk about the ADUs because that's before us and we have some issues with it. And so we're going to hold up on that just for now, because but could you explain more about the palette, these other, because we went through tiny homes, but there's others here, and how this may or may not fit in the footprint of our city?
I mean, I can speak to that a little bit, and then Bob would probably want to jump in. But one of the big things with the pallet or emergency shelters is that they're temporary. So number one, they're not permanently fixed to the ground. They don't meet the building code requirements for what we consider a habitable structure. And also, because they're temporary, they are exempt from the regulations set forth in the zoning ordinance, such as like setback and parking and things like that. And again, that's largely due to the temporary nature of them.
What do they look like? Because I do remember you saying that at the beginning. But what do these structures look like?
Do we have a good picture?
Yeah, there's a picture here.
They're kind of like the, like metal, almost like a shed. looking thing. I don't want to call it a shed, but it's
Oh, I see. So these would be considered the pallet homes?
correct, yeah. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but.
So, it's a pallet to me, it's a name brand. It's like Crescent Wrench is actually an adjustable wrench. Pallet is a name brand. I had one review with that name brand. It was, so in a single-family home, you have to have a minimum of 70 square foot for it. A pallet has, the one that in front of me had 67 square foot and 100 square foot for the entire structure. It was all on one level, but it doesn't have all the components that the building code requires, or some other things that we laid out tonight do. And I just wanted to just make that clear and defined, that with the pallet shelters, the ones that we had did hook up to sanitary, they did not have bathrooms, they did not have sinks. These are all things that are required to the Connecticut State Building Code, which the only way you get out of the state building code is you have to ask for modification to get out of the state building code. I want to make that clear. There were some pathways laid out tonight that all have those components, and that mods would not be required. Again, I'm going back to like tiny homes, those are a pretty good discussion how to talk about something that is more compliant and easily assembled. To be compliant. And building code is a minimum standard. I'd like to just tell the committee, we're just asking for the minimum, which would be a bath, sinking, and so forth. And there's also a wind load. There's also a snow load that the pallet shelters did not meet. So that's also a threshold that we set. New Haven's a coastal community, and we have, some wind loads. We have some storms that people up north don't have. So that's also concerns. You also have to have an actual foundation, and these get put down on basically pressure treated, and they have a fiberglass or a hard plastic shell around the outside, a skin on steel frame. They were kind of deployed, from our research, if you have a hurricane and your community is displaced or a natural disaster of some sort, somebody would come in, let's just say the government, and they would deploy these. Maybe put a communal shower in, and then you kind of house yourself in there until your houses get put together, back together. But again, more on a temporary basis for sure. Did the best we could. But like I said, we definitely put forth a couple other options in front of you that are definitely code compliant and have an easier pathway. They're just smaller in scale. Single-family houses is what a tiny home is. It's no different.
And thank you. My final question, Madam Chair. We have similar structures. So we know we have the ADUs, which is various things you can do with that. The tiny homes we've covered. Are there any other similar structures? And we don't want to, so I'm talking very general, and even with the pallets, just to get an understanding of what that is, or emergency housing. We understand that there's some litigation, and so we want to be careful what we discuss as it pertains to anything more specific than that. So I'm keeping the questions very general. But outside of what you presented with the ADUs and the tiny homes, are there any other similar structures that would fit in the footprint of New Haven that we should consider?
So there's a lot more, right? Even Pallet, the company, has a number of different, models, if you will. Irrespective of the company or that typology, there's a lot in between a mobile home, for example, prefabricated homes. But each of those, like mobile homes, there's code pathways. Prefabricated homes, although they're constructed in a factory, they have to meet the building code. So there's a wide range. The tiny homes is interesting because it's new. The state building code officials, to Bob's point, we can only do what the state tells us to do. Like, we're not home rule in this regard. So the state building code is the directive to us. I remember your predecessor, Jim Tercio, there was a lot of pride when they actually added tiny homes to the state building code. It was a big lift to make that jump and maybe lower the standard, quite frankly, and that's how it got codified as a proper name in the building code, the tiny houses. But to your point, there's we could equally just be talking about, maybe a mobile home park or something that's been in the Connecticut landscape over the years, but maybe not necessarily what we're seeing a lot of demand for right now.
I just have a big question.
Of course.
So I think what I should ask is, what do we currently have? So we don't have tiny homes currently.
Yeah, go ahead.
Or are there mobile, what does our zoning currently permit that we actually do have that's addressing this problem?
So this is not explicitly addressing the homelessness problem, but we do have areas of the city where there are smaller homes on a lot. What we don't have and what we haven't envisioned or permitted in the zoning ordinance is sort of the higher density cluster of small homes that would address the issue of, let's say, an ADU tower in the backyard that shades the neighbor's yard, right? Like that seems to be an issue that's coming up with accessory dwelling units. If we were to use some of the vacant, open lots throughout the city for smaller clusters of tiny homes that fit better within the natural, like the fabric of the neighborhood in terms of height, and scale, I think that is a real opportunity and something that we haven't done, but other communities have. We have a few photos of those types of things where you have a small courtyard, perhaps a parking area on one side, but it sort of creates a little community on with smaller homes, so tiny homes, but not a huge development of tiny homes. It could be 4, 5, 6 of these on a lot that would be the size of the kinds of lots that we have available in the city of New Haven.
Do we have a mobile park here in New Haven? A mobile park? We don't have a mobile home park. I don't remember seeing that.
It would be something like that, but with homes that are more in line with the type of the character of the city.
Yeah, and to add to that, our ordinance, I like that Laura used the word cluster, because our ordinance doesn't, it allows you to have multiple structures on a lot. You still have to obviously meet like the setback requirements and there's distance between buildings requirements, but because of the size of the lots, you're really not going to see more than 1 or 2, maybe even 3, separate principal structures on a lot. But our ordinance currently allows for that. It's just that the cluster idea that Laura mentioned, due to those requirements, isn't really feasible with the current regulations as they are now.
And our current zoning even is very restricted. Some of the very many sliver lots that we have throughout the city.
Correct. Yeah.
That would maybe be, would permit some tiny home to be on a sliver lot. The few that we have left, we're selling them like hotcakes. Okay, that's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Alder Shaver?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. During our Health and Human Services Committee meeting last week, where we discussed some of these issues, representatives from the city talked about the challenge that the city is facing around both the emergency shelter, the idea of potentially building some kind of emergency shelters or tiny homes, which was the availability of land for where we could build these structures. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the city has been thinking about that and any challenges around finding space to build community like what we're talking about.
Been involved in those discussions in over a year.
Yeah, I think it's been the journey to figure out a smaller format, a small, healthy home format. Our next step in this process is, hopefully to gain the board's approval on ADUs. We think it opens up a lot of opportunity. We think there's real merit in the structure of that. It's code compliant approach. But to your point, I'm not surprised that came up in the other hearing. You're seeing a lot of different unique technologies emerging, and anything that comes our way, we're going to consider them. To points made, our codes are in a certain place right now, but we've opened the door to lots of considerations, and I think tonight is another step in that process.
Questions from committee? Alder Rodriguez?
Yes, thank you. In terms of the emergency temporary, do you know what temporary means?
180 days. So they can't be in place for more than 180 days.
And have you explored in our neighboring cities what they are doing in reference to tiny homes and villages? Thank you.
So there's quite a bit of research now in different communities in Connecticut and generally around the country opening up to tiny homes in smaller formats. Some more, good like Fort Morgan, they have a whole, tiny home approach, if you will. Around here, I would suggest, although the city feels very strongly that there needs to be a regional set of strategies around affordable housing, we're kind of busy and we're making sure that we do what we can locally. I know, Eliza, you sit on some of the regional boards and commissions. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about what's happening in the region. But we've kind of had our head down to make sure that we continue to deliver on what's coming before us right now.
I would just say that most of the models we've been looking at are in other parts of the country where there is, a 2,000 unit tiny home village outside of Austin, right? Places where there is much more land accessible. And so we have not seen as many models for what we were just talking about. 6 to 10 units aren't something that we're seeing here right now. And quite frankly, there's not a lot of appetite in the suburbs or other regions across the state at this point. We really are, as Mike was saying, going to SCROG meetings, trying to encourage our surrounding towns to think about how they are part of the solution to the housing crisis, and it's slow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, one more question.
Yes. And then, yes.
Yeah, also all the reprograms, guys, to answer your question on other communities, I have seen, not inside, but I've seen the outside of the tiny home cluster that's in Meriden on Broad Street. There is such a thing. It's a cluster home just right on Broad Street, Meriden, and it looks very nice, to be honest with you. I've never been in it, but they're all code compliant from what I'm being told. I've talked to somebody in the community.
So, Director Brown, in reference to the tiny home villages, let's say, are you saying that we're looking at land? Because, for example, I know that in North Branford, they have a tiny home village. And I see mobile homes and I see small houses and I see other structures. But are you saying that we are, for New Haven, looking at land and how, and of course, looking at our ordinances in terms of how we could serve and make these tiny homes for individuals? Thank you.
We have had very preliminary conversations with our teams about what types of spaces might be big enough to house more than one or two structures. Though they are very preliminary, it's not a specific strategy that we're advancing right now. It does require a significant resource. As you all know, our opera funds are largely allocated at this point. We are going into sort of a next phase of planning. So we're still open to considering them, but don't have specific plans on the table at this point.
I think one of the things to keep in mind too is with these, tiny house clusters, as the ordinance is written now, is as I mentioned, there's still the setback requirements. So you'd have in your standard residential zone, for example, a 25-foot rear yard setback where no building can be located, 8 feet on the side yard, 10 feet on the other side yard, around 17 feet on the front. You're already kind of limited as to where those buildings can go on a parcel. And then there's also regulations in terms of distance between the buildings, and each one of those buildings would have to have a parking space as well. So right now, in order to get, let's say 6, these tiny homes on a parcel, you're looking at a pretty large parcel based on how our ordinance is written now. It's doable, but it'd be difficult to do without getting relief of some kind as it's currently written.
Thank you.
The only other related challenge that I'll name is just we really are interested in density as well, right? The scale of what we need to address ultimately doesn't get addressed in 6 to 10 small units. So tiny home village can serve a purpose, and we need to get many, many more units online than that would address.
One more, thank you. In reference, you shared that the question of affordable housing, tiny homes, but we know practice suggests that that really isn't so. My question stems around, and also the fact that we have a population that is homeless but is working, and they can afford rents, they just may not be getting them. But in terms of the affordability, that we, in terms of tiny homes or whatever structures are decided, that it be structures that individuals could afford and not just anyone could put a price to them. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alder, I guess what was the question?
Okay, no, I'm sorry.
Oh.
I probably answered it. I mean, in terms of a suggestion to the team that they take into account.
Thank you. Any other questions from the developers? Is that good? Any questions? Another, all right. Alder Fairland?
I just have one other, I think it will be good to know at some point how much available land we do have through, I know this is a workshop, but I think that would be good to know.
Like vacant land or
Well,
just underutilized?
Well, land that maybe the city has that would be possible to have something built on other than people's backyards, because that may or may not fly. I mean, I'm not, you know, that's quite a process, right? The person has to build it themselves. But how much land do we have that would avail any of these kind of homes that are mentioned here? I think that would be good to get. I think I still should do that for you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Fairland. Yes, if we could get a part of that, that would be excellent.
Today is Grand List Day, so perfect time.
Excellent.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alder Severcus?
Thank you. So to Alder Farrell's point, that was going to be my question, because you quickly mentioned that there are sliver lots, and we definitely would like to know where in the city. Additionally, I see here that you have on the sheet, Newhallville parcel analysis. Are you saying that in that area of Newhallville, there is opportunity for ownership, or because we're seeing here?
So this is one example of some of the analysis that staff have started. Malachi Bridges has been working diligently on this project with an architecture firm to identify not only parcels that would be available based on lot size, so for our zoning regulations, but those parcels that would be most feasible to develop a tiny home. So if they're, most ideal. So if there is, for instance, an existing driveway, those that are on a corner lot that would have easy access to additional dwellings on the property. So that's what you see identified here. So that there are some criteria that are used other than zoning, like the availability, the size of the parcel, and the lot coverage of the existing building. So that's the type of analysis that we could continue. I don't know how many neighborhoods that has been conducted with. Definitely this is one example, but it does give you an idea of the scope of the potential.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
So this is a workshop, so there isn't legislation on the table. Just that there are additional presenters this evening. Oh, excellent. The next set of presenters, please come up. Continuing the workshop, yeah. Is this the one that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You said that.
This is the next group.
Oh, okay. Our next presenters are from the Rosette Neighborhood Village, if you please come. Please, good evening. If you please state your names and addresses for the record.
Sure. My name's Mark Colville. I'm here representing the Rosette Neighborhood Village Collective, which I'll explain what that is. And I live at 203 Rosette Street here in the Hill.
My name is Joel Gaddis, I live at 203 Rosette Street, tiny home number 4.
I'm Suki Godak. I am a resident leader in the backyard at 203 Rosette Street. I'm in tiny home number 1.
Well, thanks. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. I just want to start by giving a little bit of context for our input here. First of all, we did, one of our members of our collective did send an email which included a PowerPoint presentation, which I hope, yeah, okay, so you have that printed out, great. Unfortunately, due to the fact that the meeting was fairly short notice for us, we weren't able to get an actual representative from PALA to speak, but we do have that, and I'd encourage folks, there's some good information in there. Yeah, and to kind of further give context, I think having heard what's been presented so far, I appreciate everything that's been said, and I also feel like we are the real experts that you need to be talking to tonight, okay? And I'll explain why. First of all, we're not housing experts, we're not building code experts, we're not zoning members, and we're certainly not housing developers. What we are is human rights defenders, okay? In a population of 138,000 people in this city, homelessness is, well, I mean, it's not only an epidemic, it's been declared a state public health crisis by the governor. In a population of 138,000 people in this city, in 2023, out of 290,000 calls to the 211 helpline, a full 32% of those, or 92,000, were requests for emergency shelter, okay? The emergency is tonight. It's not a matter of getting things straight with the building, the state building code, when you literally are kicking people, dozens of people onto the sidewalk at 11 p.m. every night, okay? That, I've heard nothing tonight that plans to address that tonight, okay? And we are trying to help people whose emergency is tonight, literally dying in the street. We have people dying every winter in the streets here, particularly when the police are sent in to bulldoze encampments, okay? When I say we're human rights defenders, all we're trying to do is to bring this city into compliance with the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The fact is that people have a right to take refuge somewhere, okay? And that is not being respected by this city, okay?
Madam Chair, I'm going to just interrupt. I think we're going.
I'll move on. The economy that we all labor under.
Excuse me, can I finish my
Yes,
sentence
go ahead.
first, and then I'll let you talk. This is our meeting. What we're doing tonight is we're going to talk about the potential role that tiny homes and other structures play within our city.
Right.
And so if you would address that,
I will move on.
thank you very much.
Okay. So, just to kind of, again, to give the context, the economy that we're all laboring under has created homelessness as a permanent condition, not a temporary thing, not an emergency. It's a permanent condition in this city. This fact remains unacknowledged. The shelter system is an abject failure, which is the reason that we put together this privately funded project called the Rosette Neighborhood Village. As I said, the problem of homelessness is growing, not shrinking. It's going to be much worse this winter. With the present allocation of resources in the city, it's not realistic to expect that we're going to be able to develop enough housing units ever, really ever, to solve the problem of homelessness, which is obviously the reason for this hearing tonight. We have to, when I say the problem with the shelter system is myriad, but the most obvious one to me in doing this work is that most of the people who are on the street and unhoused can't access it, even if they want to. There's issues involved, mental health issues involved, trauma involved in being homeless and all of that, which make it, it excludes people literally from being able to access shelter. So obviously the need for this is right here in front of us. And again, when it comes to cost effectiveness, let me just tell you what we've done in the backyard at 203 Rosette Street. And again, we were trying to just simply respond to this reality that's happening every night. And by the way, when I mentioned about the 211 calls, lots of them were, the response, the routine response has been to send people over to Rosette Village, okay? Because there's no place else to go, all right? We have to, we kind of have to ask how realistic it is to expect to be able to develop housing units that are going to be able to solve this crisis. The building codes that we're talking about have been used as a way to basically, by City Hall, to assert a zoning preference in opposition to the will of the neighborhood, which was reflected in the zoning board, your zoning board, which voted 4-1 to keep these homes functioning. But what we did was in 2021, when we believed the city was poised to bulldoze the largest, encampment, tent encampment for unhoused people. We saw that coming down the line, and we knew that those people were going to have no place to go. So what we did was we declared our backyard to be public land. And then we started inviting people who were being evicted from tents, from public places, to come and form a community in the backyard. In other words, a supported tent city. What we were trying to do was just, in addition to providing emergency hospitality, was to model for the city, a real solution to homelessness. When people come and ask to take space in the backyard, we tell them we're not giving you a tent, we're not giving you a tiny home, we're giving you a piece of land. That automatically restores you to the status of neighbor, and that comes with responsibilities as well as rights. That's the path out of homelessness, to turn people into neighbors. The reality that we are dealing with, I'm a homeowner in the Hill, the reality that I've been dealing with for 30 years is that we have all of these people that we're supposed to be treating as strangers that get evicted from shelters every morning and are basically told to scatter and disappear in my neighborhood, okay? Basically, Fairhaven and the Hill is where everybody disappears and scatters to, okay? And again, we are not allowed to treat them like our neighbors through city policy and city law, okay? We decided we were gonna not obey that, okay? We decided that these folks are our neighbors and we don't have to send them out of the neighborhood to help them. We can give them hospitality ourselves. And so that's what we did. We started in the summer of 22, inviting people in. A collective quickly formed around that, the Rosette Neighborhood Village Collective. And that was a regional response from all over the region of New Haven, and particularly suburban folks were calling and outraged about the continued evictions by police and the violent evictions of unhoused people from public spaces. And they wanted to know, when they found out that we were doing this, they wanted to know how they could help. So we took that, we took that incentive to form the Rosette Neighborhood Village Collective, which is made up of quite a few people who have different areas of expertise, including one who's a housing, real estate professional, who's it's Jacob Miller, who I'm speaking in his place tonight. So I'm sorry that he would be able to give you a lot more of the, the specs and such. But yeah, so in January of 23, they started to raise money to replace many of the tents with tiny homes. The result of that is a project that cost about $123,000, including site prep and the purchase of 4 single unit pallet shelters and 2 double units. And the singles can fit 2 people and the doubles can fit 4, although we're not currently overloading them like that at the present time. So again, $123,000. We had a landscape architect come in and set the place, design it for us. We had a whole electrical system with buried power lines that go to each of the homes. And again, we were able to do this in a budget of $123,000. The important thing to understand about tiny homes, and maybe that's a misnomer actually, okay? And I think that's where we're starting to get tripped up in terms of zoning and building, codes and such. We're not claiming that these are individual self-sufficient homes. They're emergency shelter. They call them tiny homes because that's the market, term that's used for them. Obviously, we're not claiming that they have plumbing or heating or cooking facilities or anything like that. You need these things, set up in an area where you have a central facility where everybody can access those things. It's obviously more of a communal approach to housing, okay? But it's affordable. I mean, and I've been saying, many of us spend upwards of 2/3 of, low-income people can spend upwards of 2/3 or more of their monthly income on housing. Well, what if there was an option, as somebody mentioned earlier? What if there was, some people can pay, but they can't pay the rents in New Haven, People working a full-time job at minimum wage cannot afford an apartment in New Haven. They will never be able to, okay? We need a new category, okay? We need it yesterday, okay? Not in the next session. We need it yesterday. And so what we've done with all kinds of opposition, frankly, in our backyard, and now we're being squeezed in terms of they're selling the public property that we've taken care of, community garden space, literally taken care of for 30 years, is now being sold by this mayor out from under us. And we have right now 14 or 15 tents set up there, which we do not plan to move until the city designates 1 or more parcels of land on which this emergency type of hospitality can be offered to people. This is a health and safety issue, and we need it. We need it yesterday. We continue. Let me just wrap this up. There were a couple of things that Jacob wanted me to. The key to ending homelessness is not just housing, okay? And in fact, even the models of housing that or emergency shelter that we're talking about tonight, they will not work if we use a methodology, which is the methodology that we use to run the shelters. Shelters in this city are run according to a criminal justice model. okay? They are essentially jails. It's mandatory, I mean, because there's no other option for an unhoused person tonight, no other legal option for anybody, including doubling up in an apartment, because you get sanctioned by landlords for that. You get thrown out for that, right? So there's no other alternative, legal alternative at this point in the city tonight, except self-institutionalization in a shelter. You give up, and why do I say it's a criminal justice methodology? You give up your privacy, your agency, your property, the right to visit your loved ones, your pets, your job if it doesn't fit into the schedule of the shelter, okay? And you get patted down as soon as you walk in, okay? It is literally everything you give up when you walk into a jail. And you know, we sit around scratching our heads about why don't people, you know, we're opening shelter beds, why don't people accept them? Well, it should be obvious, okay? So the key to solving homelessness is not just housing, it's community, okay? We love the slogan, we've used it many times over the years, housing first. What we've learned is it's community first, okay? It's the right to act like a neighbor. It's the ability to have private space, okay? Autonomous space. And that seems to be the one thing that scares the crap out of this city and its policy when it comes to low-income people. We don't want them either to have a foothold in the neighborhood or to have the kind of autonomy that people need to be neighbors and to live independently, all right? So what we've done in the backyard is simply set up a model of how this could work. And then, you know, we were talking earlier about, you know, do we have any other examples of this? Well, you know, we just came, you drive an hour and a half to Providence, Rhode Island, you can see it from the highway. There's 45 of these shelters have been put on a piece, I believe it's a piece of state-owned land, right in the middle of the city. And that is expected to be open. They have some zoning hurdles to get over, but that's already constructed and ready to go. It's probably going to be open before the, you know, the cold weather sets in. And then Burlington, Vermont has, I believe, 60 of them that they've set up there. The arguments from, you know, building experts here that that these things are somehow not safe for the winter. Well, there's plenty of municipal governments that would beg to differ on that. And when we're talking about the, you know, the safety issues around pallet shelters, we're talking about the building code. You're not talking about the actual structures themselves being dangerous. The building code apparently states that that if a dwelling doesn't have a kitchen and plumbing, then it's not safe for habitability. Obviously, the way around that, and a category that simply needs to be made in the zoning and the building code is, you know, you have a central facility where all of that stuff can be accessed within 20 feet of where everybody's living, okay? That's the model that we're working with, and it's the model that we're going to insist on going forward, especially this winter. You know, we're faced with the problem again that, and again, you know, we have the folks that that live in the backyard, and I'm going to turn it over to them right now. They are the ones, when I say that all 211 is sending people over to us, these folks are every night are dealing with the crisis of homelessness. This is not a gated community in our backyard. We have a central hospitality hut because we simply don't have room for everybody who shows up, in which these folks are welcoming people in, giving them food, in some cases, you know, having to bathe them even. You know, have people with all kinds of health problems. And these folks who are formerly unhoused themselves are doing this work. We should really reflect on that, okay? And then, you know, finally, you know, again, the first step, in my opinion, the first step towards getting to a place where people can actually be housed is that we need a moratorium on the evictions from public space of people who are camping, okay? Now, designate one or more parcels on which that can be done safely and legally, and then go and support it, okay? But this notion that we're going to somehow get to livable cities to a livable city here when we continue to criminalize people simply for their identity, not for their behavior, okay? Simply for their identity as not being able to afford an apartment, okay? That has to stop. And once we commit as a body to stopping that, then it's on us to develop solutions that really work. Okay, we're not going to do that when we just keep calling the cops in when people are violating zoning laws. Okay, anyway, I'd like to introduce Suki Godak.
Hi, I'm Suki Godak, and I'm the resident leader at Resident Neighborhood Village, and I myself was at the tent city before the eviction of that encampment. And this tiny home community really is much more than just a solution to the crisis of homelessness. It actually was a godsend for me and for so many others. Staying at Tent City, not only was I battling with homelessness and living without heat or electricity, I also was kind of lost, and I was lost in the depression that comes along with being homeless. Since I have come to the Rosette Village and become a part of community, I have full-time jobs, as does my husband. We work with the community every day. We cook 3 meals for everyone in the neighborhood on a daily basis, and I am right at the front lines of battling homelessness. I see a dozen or more people that come to me every day saying that they do not have shelter for the night. Those people we allow into our emergency hut or shelter, and we try to help as many as we can, but it's first come, first served basis. Also, we have overflow into our main dining area where some people actually have to sit up at night because there is not room for everyone. But for the residents that we do have, all of our residents have great mental health benefits that come along with that. Also, they have access to Cornell Scott and other facilities, to harm reduction supplies, to Desk Downtown Soup Kitchen, who also helps our residents with many of their needs. Also, we have tons of community resources as well as churches who come and volunteer or contribute to our community, as well as I believe even some community service projects and some youth groups, schools. We have a lot of support for the community, and that's because we're doing exactly what we need to do. And that's we're surviving as neighbors. We're taking care of our families, our friends, and people who are citizens of New Haven and that see this homelessness crisis and want to help. And that's exactly what we're doing. Right now we have 30 residents. That is not the highest we've had. We've had up to 40. Right now, though, we have it's transitional housing. So you see a lot of people that leave for different reasons, but from our experience, we've seen many success stories, people who have stayed there temporarily and then they've gotten an apartment, people who have gotten housing vouchers and things once they've been able to obtain some of the things they need, like identification or access to caseworkers, things of that nature. But this is really a serious problem with the gentrification of New Haven, like so many other cities. This is a solution that I really feel that you guys should consider. And I feel like just the fact that we don't have the individual kitchens or bathrooms has not been a barrier for us. In fact, it has been the opposite. It has been a plus, and it has helped with the community and the support that many of these unhoused people need, especially when mental health tends to be such an issue. So I just want to say that it is an incredible project. It's the alternative to the shelter system. It is affordable, and I believe that it is the future of New Haven.
Excuse me, I'm Joel, and first of all, I want to say thank you for letting me speak. I'm a firm believer in perception, so I just want to give you a little brief history about myself. I have no criminal background, and I'm disabled right now. I receive a monthly income, which is not enough in New Haven for me to even get a room for rent at a rooming house. Now, we have some throughout the city. They're about $900, $950 a month. It's communal, share bathroom, kitchen, but you get a room. I don't make enough. Social Security doesn't pay me enough money to cover that. I have nowhere else to go. I won't go to the shelters here in New Haven, and I'll tell you why. One, they say we have a medical exempt, which myself, I have sleep apnea. I'm also dealing with a heart condition. And the medical exempt is you have to stay indoors the whole day. So with my mental health and my medical condition, on occasions I need to take a walk, I need to around, or if I have to go fill a prescription, or whatever it may be. But the way the rules are now, if you leave, you stay out in the street. So what kind of medical exemption am I really getting? So now I'm stuck all day in the elements, then what's the point? I have to come back all the way across town just to lay in a bed, 'cause that's all I get. It's embarrassing what they feed you. It really is. If you don't know, please, go to Columbus House for breakfast in the morning. Feel free. You know what you get? Those toddler cereal. You get one little toddler cereal. As a grown adult with medical needs, you think that's smart? You think that's healthy? I don't think so. I looked at the picture here, and if you notice, whoever did this did a good job by showing you perception. Perception that that tiny home looks beautiful with green grass. That one has green grass, but look at the small little sheds. It's an emergency. It's drab, no leaves, no nothing, and a porta potty in the middle. I wouldn't want to stay here with that picture, would you? I would. Please come to Rosette and see. The way we live there is so different. It's communal. We have everything we need there. There's nothing that I don't need. I have a shower. I have access to a bathroom 24 hours a day. I have a place to sleep. I have a key. I can lock my stuff in there, and not worry about somebody stealing my daughter's picture. Because fortunately, that's what happens. And no one throws rocks at you when you're sleeping outside. And worried about, these teenagers out there. It's a nightmare. So you don't get no sleep. You're just running around ragged. The shelter system doesn't really help if you don't have basic skills. That's the number one problem of why everything is failing. There's no basic skills. If I've been living in the street for 10 years, what would make you think I know how to operate a washing machine? What would make you possibly think I know how to boil an egg? I don't have these basic skills. I don't have basic skills to manage money and go to a grocery store. You lose this. Because when you're on survival mode, all you think about is the next hour. That's it. And when you get kicked out because you got nowhere to rest your feet, you try walking around for 3 days with no sleep and see if you won't talk to yourself. And people call you, schizophrenic. No, you're just tired. You're just rest. You need to feel safe. And the problem is, this isn't what this can be. This to me is a nightmare, this picture here. What we have over there, what we do over there, what's embarrassing is that the shelters call my phone. I'm a homeless man with nowhere to go. I get calls from Milford shelters. I get calls from other shelters begging for people to stay because they have no place for them. Yale calls me all the time. You think that's fair to me? I'm a homeless guy. And I have to take care of everyone there. But it's pride. It's things that I relearned. I relearned how to serve other people now. These are skills that I learned. I had to relearn how to use a washing machine. It ain't that easy. They're digital now. It ain't crank anymore, you know what I mean? Or throw some quarters in. No, it's not that easy no more. And for a lot of us with mental health issues, what happens? You get frustrated, you just give up. It's that easy when you have mental health. You just give up. Because you've been denied a chance to show yourself. I have PTSD. I got shot in the line of duty in my career. I have bowel reconstruction surgery. I have spinal surgery. I have nightmares every night from what happened. But I'll do it all over again. It was my job. It was my career. I don't regret it. But a lot of us are not criminals. A lot of us are educated. There's so many different people that come by. You'll be surprised from all walks of life. We're not all drug addicts. I myself been sober for 2 years now. After when I got shot, I got addicted to opioids. And back then they were giving them out like it was candy. So fortunately, the state has pretty good programs that I ended up being sober, and I got 2 years sober. Knock on wood, I plan on keep going that way. But you know what's horrible? After I finished my drug program, I got dropped off at a women's center here in New Haven. Right, fresh out of the jump program, here you go. And the warmest center closed 2 days after I got there, and I had nowhere to go. About a week later, I got hit in the head with a rock. For some teenagers going by. Just because I had no place to live. You know, think about us. This can be done properly. They say, oh, snow, wind, don't we have walkway covers at bus stops and stuff when people walk by? They exist all over the state. You could put walkway covers over that. You can then grab them. You know, it's not rocket science. It's just wording out the laws and the things. Don't make it difficult more for people like us. You know, where am I supposed to go with $753 a month? You can't feed your family with $753 a month. That's what I get. So where am I gonna go? And with that, thank you.
I just wanted to add something that I forgot, and that is that the state is trying to make a legislative pathway for tiny homes development through a piece of legislation which is going to be considered again in the coming session, and from what we understand, it has a very good chance of passing. It's HR 5174, which would authorize particularly religious communities to use their property for this kind of emergency hospitality. And we believe that, and in fact, that legislation was not written by anybody under our umbrella. It came from elsewhere in the state, I believe somewhere in Norwalk. But anyway, that's very much worthy of this body's support. You know, this, and I should mention also that we've had probably half the Board of Alders has been to the backyard at Rosette Street to look around, as Joel was encouraging folks to do. Conspicuously absent, of course, has been the mayor, who we continue to urge to come and, you know, as part of his, you know, absolute duty to come and look at this. We've had about a dozen also state legislators, including Mr. Looney, the president, as I understand it, of the state legislature, who has spent a long time with us, talking to us in the backyard, and told us that he was confident that this legislation could pass. So again, when we started this in the backyard, I didn't really have the idea that that was necessarily the best place to do it. Okay, we did it because we had to. We're trying to provide a model for the city to follow, and I think it's high time that folks come and take a look at it and talk to the others who live there. Thanks.
Thank you so much for being with us this evening and for sharing your stories with us. And thank you for the work that you're doing together to build a community in New Haven. I wanted to ask if there are any questions from the committee.
I'd just like to share comment. I just want to say thank
Alder
you.
Vegas, do you have a question?
I just want to say thank you. They're in my ward. The tiny homes are in my ward. And I want to say thank you for the information that you've provided to us all here today. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We just want to remind our colleagues to wait until they're acknowledged by the chair before they
My
continue.
apologies.
So we can maintain the order. Thank you for your presentation. Just have a quick question on because you mentioned it a few times, the structure of the building is what I'm interested in, and its security.
Yeah.
So how is the structure actually bolted to the ground? No, these are not tiny homes by definition. These are the pallet.
They're called pallet shelters.
Okay.
Right.
How are they bolted to the ground?
Yeah, so we put a simple foundation of crushed stone and railroad ties, and so they're sitting on those and they're bolted in to the railroad ties. And yeah, they're very sturdy. They I know that there's been maybe concerns raised about possibly trees falling on them, that they wouldn't sustain a tree falling on them. I'm not sure that many houses would either. But there's certainly no danger of that where we have them set up. Yeah, the safety really has, I mean, and also, I mean, they obviously have all kinds of, they have an emergency exit in the back, they have, you know, wired in smoke and CO2 detectors that go off simultaneously in all of them if there's a problem in one. There are a whole list of safety, standards that the city gave us when we initially got approval, zoning approval to get these things up and running. So we've been following all of that. There's a, specific way of, I guess, of removing snow from the tops of the roofs and such.
I have been there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
to go visit. I'm just trying to get it back in my hand. I think it's good to have some of the stuff on record for those that haven't been there. Are the roofs flat? It's a metal sort of.
It's a metal roof. They're not flat. They're angled. As I understand it, after we purchased the ones that we put up last October, that there's a new design in terms of the roof. And I don't know the details about that. I suppose it's maybe an improvement on what they have been previously doing. But again, we haven't had any kinds of problems with them.
Do you know the specs on, this is my last question, but the specs on any, for wind resistance? Since they're tied down with the.
I wish Jacob was here, he could explain that. And it might actually, I'm not sure if it's in here, but we can provide that information for you, certainly.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that'll be interesting. That's kind of here.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, we can follow up on that.
Thank you again for your presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Phil. And thank you, Mr. Phillips.
All set?
All right. I believe that we will move on to, thank you, Dr. Phil. So we're gonna, so thank you everyone for your participation in the workshop. We're gonna now move on to the second item, OR-2024-0022, the ordinance amendment to the city's code of our flood damage prevention ordinance. Easy. Thank you for being here, for coming back. If you could please state your name and your names and address list for the record.
I'll get started. Giovanni Zinn, city engineer, 95 South Beach Terrace.
Good evening, Laura Brown, Director of the City Plan Department, 262 West Rock Avenue, New Haven.
Bill 632, Blue Avenue, New Haven, Director of OPID.
Helen Rosenberg, Economic Development Officer, 212 West Elm Street, New Haven.
Thank you so much. Welcome to begin your presentation.
Okay, thank you for allowing us to present this item to you tonight. I do have some slides that I'd like to distribute, actually a variety of materials. I don't know if you have the City Plan Commission staff report in your packet. Do you have that? Great. We do. I understand you also have a copy of the amended ordinance, and I'd like to present this one for our reference tonight.
Other pictures, did I do that? Okay, good. Love it. Takes a while. It's just.
Oh, no.
So everyone should have a copy of the slides, the draft ordinance, and the city plan commission report. Oh, and there's also, there is a summary. Is it, did that get distributed too in your packet?
We have the proposed updates of the city, and then the flood damage prevention ordinance, and then the slides.
Excellent. Okay. All right, well, we're ready. I'll start with the slides. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the city's flood damage prevention ordinance. So this is a technical ordinance. It is not part of the city's zoning ordinance, but it regulates the special flood hazard area in the city. And much of our city is within what's called the special flood hazard area, which includes high risk of flood. The purpose of the ordinance, as you see here, is to provide regulatory oversight to reduce hazards in those flood-prone areas, and it was adopted into our zoning code in 1991. The reason I think you are probably familiar with this is that we did a pretty significant revision to the ordinance in 2023. That was led by the city plan department, but included a number of other departments across the city, and it was adopted by you all in 2023. Really, the intention of that full revision was to align the flood damage prevention ordinance with the state building code that had been updated in 2022, and to anticipate the impacts of climate change and future sea level rise in the city, which, as I'm sure you all know, has impact on many of our structures. In 2024, we discovered some additional items to be out of alignment with the 2022 building code. And the provisions that you see before you tonight are really a refinement of the large overhaul that we did in 2023 with the following goals: to ensure that we can revitalize industrial structures within the special flood hazard area. Many of you live in neighborhoods that include industrial buildings that we do anticipate using in some way, and we as a city want to be able to make use of those areas to promote the public health, safety, and welfare of residents. So as I mentioned, the overall purpose of the ordinance is really to ensure public health and safety and to minimize public and private losses due to flood conditions. And I will mention, I don't have slides on here, but every year we bring before you our city's compliance with the community rating system program, which is offered by FEMA, and that affords residents in the city discounts on their flood insurance because we meet community outreach requirements. We are diligent in collecting elevation certificates for any building in the special flood hazard area, and we have a strong ordinance. Shall I pause? Is there anything that you need to have that? Okay. All right. Excellent. So we brought this before the City Plan Commission, and were advised to mention some key points within this that strengthen protections for residents. Actually, I think I'm going to go through some of the changes first, and I'll come back to the slides to emphasize how some of these provisions compare to the building code. But as you'll hear from Bob, if he speaks on this later, much of what we adopted in the flood damage prevention ordinance goes over and above what the building code requires. So we have more stringent requirements. One of the big changes that we made in 2023 is that we're now requiring building at base flood elevation plus 2 feet, which is the most stringent in the state of Connecticut. So that means any base flood elevation, any new building, new construction must be built 2 feet above that. So this revision before you, you'll see the summary. I don't know if you had a chance to review that, but I've gone point by point through every single change that we are proposing. And the major change in this revision is to actually correct an error. So in the 2023 revision, we did not change anything with regard to what is called the look-back time. So there is a period at which the building department looks back on the value of the building and calculates whether or not a proposed change is a substantial improvement. In 2016, my predecessor, Karen Gilvarg, had changed what was previously a lifetime look back, so looking over the whole history of a structure, which could be 100 years or more in our city, to a 10-year look back. So that change was made. Board of Alders adopted it. It was done. It's in Legistar. You can find it. However, when we made the revision in 2023, the base text that was used was the previous version. So when we adopted the 2023 ordinance, we went back to a lifetime look back for substantial improvement, which is very impactful for new developments in the city. So that is really the most important change that we're proposing tonight, is to correct that. So that is the first one, to a 10-year look back. The next, so I'll just go point by point if that's okay.
Yes.
If you prefer that I not, I can expedite this, but the next change that I'm proposing is to specify coastal A zones in permit procedures. And I understand this is in alignment with the state building code too. The proposed update is to include coastal A zones along with coastal B zones in the definition of the as-built lowest floor elevations, because they're held to the same standards in the building code. And I've provided this nice FEMA graphic for you to explain what coastal A zones and coastal B zones are. And this does a nice job because it shows you what's called the limb wall line, which is the limit of moderate wave action. So you can see farther out toward the ocean, seaward, is the coastal high hazard area. That's the VE zone. And as you move inland, you approach the coastal A zone. So you can see the building on stilts there in the coastal A zone. And then as you move further inland, that is the AE zone. So that's landward of the limb wall line. And the difference is really the wave height and impact of likely damage of those of coastal storms or coastal rise in those areas. Okay, section 5.1.1. Yes. We've added a reference in provisions for flood hazard reduction general standards. And in this area, this was just a point of clarification to align with the building code. So a reference to the 5.3.2 standards for fully enclosed areas below base flood elevation. And if you would like to follow along with any of these, they're highlighted in yellow in the revision that I just sent. The next and substantial change that we're requesting is to update restrictions on above ground storage tanks. The proposed update can, let me just say, in 2023, the 2023 version used a pretty broad brush for how it dealt with storage tanks and prohibited both underground and above ground tanks. Prohibited. What it didn't anticipate is that there are above ground tanks already in the special flood hazard area that are in need of maintenance and replacement. And some of them serve important purposes in our city, like fueling our school buses is one example. So we are proposing a shift in the restrictions to allow above ground storage tanks so that those tanks might be maintained, but to continue to prohibit underground storage tanks in the special flood hazard area. And one thing to note is that those above ground tanks would still need to meet the building code's requirements for anchoring and tethering so that they don't pose a flood risk, or like floating away or damaging a property. One additional change, section 5.3.4, is to allow dry floodproofing of non-residential structures. The current ordinance provides no specific considerations for dry floodproofing. In fact, that was completely removed from the 2023, in the 2023 revision. And dry floodproofing is in non-residential structures is allowable by the building code and would allow us to make best use of some of the buildings that are in the special flood hazard area if they're non-residential, but could still house other types of uses if dry floodproofing were allowed. Section 5.3.25 also envisions dry floodproofing. It just makes a reference to a section where that was eliminated previously. Section 5.4, including 5.4.1, 5.4.1 to 5.1.1.4, allows the use of fill for structural support in all special flood hazard areas besides the coastal high hazard areas, zones B, E, and coastal AE. So you can see that on the map here. So fill would be would wash out in the case of a flood. And it should not be permissible in floodways. So you can read a little bit more about that, but that aligns with the building code and with the deep model floodplain regulations. The last significant change here is just an update of the definition of buildings on the historic register. And that is because in the city of New Haven, we have a very specific reference to what we call the HRI, the Historic Resources Inventory. So the language is just updating that to align with how we refer to historic buildings. And just a quick note, the way that this language is situated in the ordinance, there is a provision to allow variances to be granted for historic buildings. In addition to the changes that we've proposed that were initially submitted to the Board of Alders, there are actually 4 very minor changes that I want to bring to your attention that are just clerical cleanup errors that we've identified since that first submission. And they are in your new text in green. And the first one appears on page 15. This is 5.1.15.3. So if you look back at where this section, the origin of this section is hazardous materials. Excuse me. So this defines hazardous materials that are prohibited in the special flood hazard area. And this previously said oil, fuel, or gas refining or storage. And in order to align this with the allowance of tanks above ground, we proposed the change oil, fuel, or gas refining or underground storage of such materials are prohibited. So those materials, oil, fuel, or gas refining or underground storage would be prohibited in the special flood hazard area. At the bottom of that page, the other text that aligns with those changes that we discussed, 5.1.20.4 referenced above ground storage tanks, again, as a prohibited use, and we are proposing to strike that. I know this is really technical, so thank you for following along. It's important. The other 2 changes do not appear in green because they are already in yellow, and they're on page 20, and the highlight tool on Word would allow me to highlight in 2 different colors here. 5.4.1 fill. After a discussion with the building official and the floodplain manager in the building department, Dan O'Neill, and at the request of engineer Zinn, we decided that the language here regarding minor grading and placing minor quantities of compacted fill shall be permitted could be struck. That didn't need to be allowable. And then we've just modified 5.4.11 to align with that it just be non-structural fill instead of the landscaping and aesthetic fill. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. Thank you for both the updates document, really what is so clearly laying out exactly what is being changed. And thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions from the committee? Alder Marshall? And no, Alder Brown. Alder Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Director Brown. I just wanted to mention something that came up in the city plan discussion that I think it's worth this committee hearing about. And that's in regards to the proposal to allow above ground storage tanks, provided that they're 2 feet above the base flood elevation and they're properly anchored. And that was the question that my fellow Commissioner Goldfield raised about the inspection of these tanks. And our building official and our city engineer both had things to say about that, but I think it's worth hearing here because allowing a storage tank as opposed to not allowing it is more permissive and less restrictive, and potentially one might presume then less safe. You know, one of the primary purposes of this ordinance is to protect life and property. And so if you're going to do something that's less restrictive, then you really need to make sure that it's going to work out. So part of the question was, well, how do we know that these above ground storage tanks are going to meet certain standards and not fail and cause spillages? And so I would appreciate it if our city staff could address the issue of both the initial installation of said tanks, but then the ongoing operation and review of these to make sure that they're not leaking on us. Thank you.
Yeah, so from a permitting standpoint, we would, as somebody puts any permit at all, just some of the process in the background is, it would come up as a tag for flood. So we have the parcel and it comes up with flood. So then that kicks off the review of both ordinance and building code. So you just can't put any old tank for whether it's propane or oil, it has to be for that specific product. So we have to upload your submittal, which has to not be, I think I said it before, just anybody involving it, out to an ASME stamp on the submittal for the tank. That also then gets verified with the submittal process in permitting. It also gets verified on the inspection as well. We also have, asked for, it has to be an elevation certificate. So they'll have to give us an SK sketch with a stamp that from an engineer that tells us where in the flood this tank's going to be. And the building code allows for tanks above or below ground. And the ordinance is BoA, so we have to not allow them, if this goes through, below ground, but we're proposing to allow them above ground. But the building code only references 1 foot above BFE. We are going above and beyond, we're going to go to 2 feet above BFE. So when we go out there, not only will we have an elevation certificate that tells us that it's going to be 2 feet above the flood, the 100-year. It's also going to have a tank that's made of materials and welded that's to a ASME standard, which is an engineering standard. And the bolting of it also has to have non-corrosive galvanized or stainless bolts. It can't be made out of steel bolts that are corroded over time. But once we're done with it, we're done with it. We don't go back in the hills. Right? The building department does. If that helps them get the process laid out.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that. That's the building department process, and our building official is absolutely correct. We don't go back and inspect periodically. However, there are state processes that for larger tanks, such as the ones we have at Middletown Avenue for our public works fueling. I'm sure the bus company falls into the same thing. Not to mention the large, huge tanks that you see around the harbor. They're all regulated by the State Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. There is a lot of licensing requirements for the people who operate the tank. So for example, we have 2 individuals that have to have certain titles under law and appear on our license for our fueling station, for example. Other facilities would have that. And then there's also mandates on tank type testing, I think certainly every 20 years. There's certain double wall tanks that you have to have. You have to have alarms to detect if there's fluids in the space between the 2 tanks. So there's a number of precautions and safeguards once you start getting into that, thousands of gallons range, and where you're also dealing with sort of a more commercial environment than, say a residential oil tank or something like that. As far as the safety of having above ground storage tanks, I think there are certainly certain classes of critical facilities like wastewater pump stations that require emergency backup generation. One could argue that a very strict interpretation of how this was originally drafted would ban or essentially ban such a thing, because you could power said generator without any sort of tank to store fuel. All this is to say that I think as we look at the ordinance, and I want to commend my colleague, Director Brown, for having done a really nice job, along with the building department, of coming through and looking at ways to adjust this ordinance and make sure that we capture things. I mean, it's great to draft an ordinance once, and especially on something that's this long and this technical. You live with it, and you're signing permits based off of it, and you find that there are unintended consequences at times. To be absolutely blunt, and I'm sure we'll be back with some more revisions and fine tunings, and staying tied up with the building code. But I don't think we're ever trying to move backwards. We're trying to make sure that the purpose that I think Director Brown did a great job of summarizing at the start remains strong in the ordinance, and that we're not causing unintended things to happen. While, some of the big thing I thought, the big headline out of this is adding the coastal A zone to the protections for the BE zone. Something that means next to nothing to the average person. But, if this is a big deal. And it causes those higher level of protections to actually apply to a significantly larger number of structures in the city. So, all in all, I think all of these things are really meant to be a really practical way to protect the city from flooding.
Thank you for that additional information. I appreciate it. I have one more, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes.
When I was first looking at this, bless you, in connection with our city plan meeting, it just occurred to me that not every edit is about increasing restriction and adding further protection. That some of it is about facilitating additional use or development. And so there's a balance here. Like the sum total of these changes isn't all just locking it down and making it all more protected. Some of it's about like, well, what could still be protective, maybe not, but not as restrictive, so that the economic potential of this former industrial area, for example, could be unlocked. Now, one might say, well, that shouldn't be our priority. Our priority should be just protection. And we shouldn't be compromising safety, right? We shouldn't be using fill at all anywhere near a flood zone, not just in a floodway. We shouldn't allow for dry flood proofing of non-residential structures in a flood zone. They should all be raised up, when it's too much risk. So I want to put that on the table and give you a chance to respond to it, because I think it's important for us to acknowledge here that there's two purposes that are behind these set of changes. And it's not all just about maximizing protection of life and property.
Thank you. That's absolutely true. And that's something we thought a lot about when we were drafting the regulations for the new MU on the wharf. And other types of development that we are working on across the city, because we are a coastal city and we have a lot of existing both infrastructure and buildings that are historic. So if we were starting from scratch and building from scratch, we might have the the freedom to, enact these for all new buildings. But there is a balance between how are we going to continue to thrive as a city in the place where we are, because we are not moving, but still be realistic about the fact that there will be an impact of sea level rise and climate change, and we have to acknowledge it and continue to grow with that. So you're absolutely right. There is this balance of development and growth, and there are people whose approach would be, we retreat from the coastline, and as a city, unfortunately, because we have so much, that we don't really have an option to retreat, particularly given the discussion that we had earlier with regard to the housing challenges we face, and so little greenfield, like open land on which to develop. We really have mainly infill existing lots. So there is always a bit of a trade-off in thinking about what is still safe for residents. How can we ensure that our residents are safe and that we're able to achieve the growth and development that we're envisioning?
I think it's also worth pointing out that when you write an ordinance like this, I think there's a strong temptation where you ban everything, right? You see the images on TV, you ban everything, one size fits all. One of the things that I've come to really appreciate in my time as a city engineer is you can't take a one size fits all approach to flood protection in New Haven. What is good for City Point is different from what's good for Long Wharf, which is different from the Mill River District, which is different from Fairhaven, which is different from the center of Westville, which is different from the Cove. All of these have problems, and I've been in front of you many times talking about different issues and how we have to fund and deal with all of them. But they all face rather distinct challenges based on the very particulars of their area. So I think some of the changes that we're looking to do is changing from things that are extremely prescriptive to something that's more performance based, right? This is how we want your building or structure to perform in a flood, aka we don't want it to wash away. And how you get there, I think there's some different options now, whether it's dry flood proofing for a very specific set of structures, or some of the stuff we've done around fill, and I think some of the things that we'll be looking at going forward as well. I think it's important to continually assess this and make sure that we're not causing also people to just avoid having to deal with the ordinance in general because it is complicated, restrictive, or sort of points you in two different directions. The look back period, for example, right? Much rather have someone with the 10 years of look back be able to do some improvements as opposed to not being able to do any improvements at all. With a longer look back period. So making sure that we create an environment where as many of our structures in these flood prone areas are able to easily and clearly deal with their flood damage prevention ordinance, and not put so much complexity around it that it becomes hard to thread the needle. Meanwhile, while having a very clear and concise ordinance that protects the structures of New Haven from flood damage. That is definitely the overriding concern, but we also want to make sure that it's clear and accessible. And I think a lot of those, changes that you referred to are trying to help navigate that.
Thank you for that additional information. That's all I have for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
My question was answered, Madam Chair, but I would like to, maybe not.
Go for it.
Thank you for your presentation. So we're talking about landfill. What is that? It's filled with what?
Structural fill? Is that what the question is about? Do you want to talk about what that is?
Yeah, so you're allowed to, in both building code and the ordinance, you're allowed to do engineered fill. So it would be levels of compaction and be an approved material. So it's stringent. It's something you have to achieve. So if your property is, say, a foot below the flood zone, right, and you need to bring it up a foot, you can put pilings. There's what we have in the ordinance. It's a piling, and then you have to anchor to the piling But then instead of having the stills, you can put engineered fill in. So it has to be compacted to a certain PSI, and it would have to be stamped by an engineer of what you're doing.
And what's the material?
It can be an aggregate of 3/4 inch pea stone. It could be some kind of walking material. You just can't put sand. You just can't put dirt.
My mind just went back to the sinking homes we had in West. And how that was filled with some kind of.
So that was a lot of organics, right, which continually settle over time and compact. These engineered fills are the absolute opposite of that. They're designed not to have that effect over time. There's a whole slew of materials, all sorts of soils and sands, and, things that are used as fill. Only some of those are, as Mr. Gill mentioned, appropriate. And that's where an engineer would certify and stamp. There's a FEMA process called the Letter of Map Revision Fill, where you are able to fill your site and bring in material to raise your site, and then FEMA will actually map you out of the flood zone so that you are no longer in the special flood hazard area. There's a lot of rules around that and a lot of complexity, and I think that's one of the things that there is no substitute for elevation, right? And also we're compared to a place like North Carolina, where you see a lot of these valleys and streams. Those are confined floodplains where if you displace the water in one place, it has to go somewhere else. On a coastline, we're in an unconfined environment where if you were to fill Long Wharf like our predecessors did, 50 years ago, that doesn't change the level of water in the harbor appreciably, because the entire harbor is connected to the Sound, it's connected to the Atlantic Ocean. So that does allow, mitigate some of the concerns you'd have with filling in confined environments where you're just sort of displacing the problem. So that is one of the options that is available through FEMA. It's something that we certainly contemplated at Long Wharf and other places as sites develop. FEMA creates all the mapping in sort of broad strokes. We've also done map revisions to do specific studies of certain areas of the city to make sure that there's more in-depth modeling and really fine-tune where that flood zone line is. And these are all tools to better make sure that our city is prepared to handle these very grave threats, as we say.
My question, Madam Chair, and thank you for that. Would you just tell us and I know some of our residents got letters and I see them. Would you tell us our main areas that this would cover? Just our top areas that are prone to flooding.
So like where the special flood hazard area is in the city? It's all along the coastline. You can bring it up if you want to take a look.
No,
on
I
the
want to
map.
do all that.
But, to be honest, I don't want to say specifically like what the geography, like where the line is, but it's probably most of Fairhaven. Anything, yeah.
Because zoning has done that, it seems like, because there was a project.
So there's a map, FEMA publishes a map, and
Yeah, we use
have
the
a
FEMA map
Okay.
to know what is in or out
Yeah.
of the special flood hazard. I mean, that's what we do, just bring up the map and show you exactly where that line is.
Certainly along Whaley Avenue.
Just along the West River. So really the three rivers along the harbor, and then there's a few along some of the creeks in the northwest part of the city. But it can vary pretty dramatically depending on how quickly you rise out of the water. So for example, southern Fairhaven is all a flood area, the River Street area. But the center of Fairhaven after that sort of rises up and comes out of the flood zone. City Point, you've got a couple streets that are absolutely in the flood zone, but Howard Avenue kind of follows a taller spine, and the land climbs out of there. So you have relatively smaller amounts of land in this lesser flood hazard area there, as opposed to Long Wharf, which is very flat as a pancake fill, and that is all in the special flood hazard area.
The lowest part of our city as well.
The intersection of Morris Causeway and Concord Street is probably one of them. There's a couple spots in Milltown Avenue that are pretty low. There's right by the post office on Brewery Street, also very, very low. I could be up here for about a half hour telling you about.
Looks like that's Willie Avenue flooded in the 70s, didn't it?
So in the early 80s, yeah. So that's actually sort of a different mechanism of flooding. It's much more similar to what we're seeing in North Carolina right now, where it's a prolonged period of very intense rainfall further up in a watershed, and then the water sort of funnels down. And that's where we had a prolonged period of flooding. Typically, our flooding is short duration, storm surge based flooding from the ocean. Those are both very important hazards to be careful of. The Western hazard is a lot rarer, but it's also much more long lasting and can be very, very, just as destructive, if not more so. We live sort of in between a rock and a hard place, between the coastal storm surge and then the possibility of rainfall induced flooding coming down from inland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your answers. Oh, Mr. Dillon.
I just wanted to just add really quick. It's also called the Riverine. So all the areas of West River.
It's called the what?
Riverine.
Riverine?
Yeah, the building code. So when you go on, if you ever go on the FEMA map, we don't just, it's just not a guess. There's actually elevations are on it. So if you type in your address, it'll tell you what your elevation is on the, if you're in the Riverine or the ocean area. It'll give you your BFA. And then it sounds simplistic, but all we do, we add the two. So if I had, Middletown Avenue, by the way, floods twice a day. So like we had 140 Middletown Avenue come up for the propane tankers and the diesel tank, I think it was last week. It was an variance on, and that was the first conversation. It came up, it triggered the flag, and we said your BFE is 12, so now you're only 14. And I think your EC elevation certificate that showed 14. So there is a way we tie it all together. It's just, we don't just look at the FEMA map, they actually have a very accurate base flood elevation. So, and it's all around the city, and it's everywhere. Fairhaven, West River, Quinnipiac, all those areas, Longmont.
Just to give you an idea of what that looks like, there was an excerpt there, but that red dot is City Hall, and you can see the special flood hazard area reaching down south toward Long Wharf. As Engineers Inn mentioned, most of Long Wharf is in there, with the exception of Asa Abloy.
Is it raised up?
The Lomarat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Everybody can swim.
Yeah. Thank you. Alder Fellow. I have on the queue, I have Alder Rodriguez and I have Alder Stedman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In reference to the look back period, when was the last time, or when do you plan on doing one? And the other question that I have is, it's kind of related, is due to the climate change. I mean, for example, the Hill neighborhood. I've seen a lot of water from year to year. The whole area of where El Grasso Boulevard coming into Congress Avenue, kind of like almost mid Congress Avenue, our streets are serious, somewhat flooding, especially in the corners. It could rain just barely, like about an hour, and you see already inundations. So my question is, are you seeing the map of the flood areas changing in our city? And in terms of the look back period, what does that really mean? Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I might get the school wrong, but is it Beecher up on Quinnipiac or something? What was the name of the school on Quinnipiac? What is it called?
Jepson? Oh, no.
No, it goes
We did
toward
the-
University of New Haven.
Yeah, we did the math on the school. I thought it was Beecher, but we did the math and we went on a look back for the lifetime of the school. Dan O'Neill and I did this as an example, and then we did a look back for 10 years. So if you have to look at it, if you have a project coming up for the school, and the project might be like $2 million, you have considerably less money. The $2 million would impact the school and make it come up to FEMA, or is it, if you go only 10 years, you wouldn't have to? It makes a big difference, because the schools are, they've had a lot of work done, and they're old, and that distance makes a lot. And permits were a different cost back then as well. And being with an aging, town, 100 years old, some of these structures, to look back, I mean, I think it doesn't make sense to do the lifetime. I think to look back for 10 years, not only aligns with the building code, but is the right approach. Because a lot of these things have been already taken out of the schools. But to chase the permits back for 30 years.
I think you were also asking when the look back actually occurs. It's when you go to pull a permit, then the building department looks back 10 years. So it's not like we look back at every property on some sort of an interval. It's only when you go to pull a permit for that property, then that property gets looked back.
Yeah, so how that happens is someone pulls a permit to do something. We all see it, everyone who's in the permit system, all the departments who are in the permit system. Building department might flag it that it's in the special flood hazard area, city plan is tagged on it, or maybe they need site plan review. So it gets kind of flagged at that point, unless they've already come in and gotten those approvals. But sometimes they'll come in and we'll say, oh, this is in the special flood hazard area. This triggers the flood damage prevention ordinance, you need a variance, or you need flood development permit to do that. And we work together to ensure that those requirements are met before the building permit is issued. But that calculation of the total value of the substantial improvement happens, Bob and his staff do that when the permit comes in.
And just so you know, we're going off the value of the building. So if the land and the building combined is 300,000, the land's worth 100, we take the land off, and the look back gets applied to the 200,000. So it only gets applied to the building, but not to the land. And then
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder David on the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A very quick question, sort of process question. I was just wondering how we discovered these, mistake is the right word, but omissions, changes that we need to make, and how that might inform us in our continued work of making sure these ordinances are doing everything they need to be doing.
Yeah, Helen, do you want to speak to that?
That before changes are made, there should be some consideration of how they might affect businesses and property owners and properties. The changes that were made in 2023 made most of the property that was non-residential, I wasn't thinking so much about residential, unusable, undevelopable, and that affected some projects we were working on and some businesses that we were helping to expand. Because what it did was it expanded the requirements that applied to, under the state building code, to properties that are waterward of that LIMWA, to everything in the special flood hazard prevention area, which didn't make a lot of sense because a lot of those provisions were in consideration of wave heights, and when you get past that line, there aren't any waves. So then you wouldn't want to sacrifice, the well-being. You don't want it to look like Asheville because you want to be able to expand the building. But it seemed as if going back to the LIMWA line for such things as requirements of pilings, which in the instance of the 198 River Street Bigelow property would have added like $500,000 to the cost and made it impossible to proceed. There wasn't much risk of anything happening in the next 30 years that would risk the environment or risk anyone's life, property. So yeah, we noticed it. We noticed it when they went in, people went in for building permits and found out that the ordinance had changed in 2023.
I think it's also worth pointing out that no ordinance that we pass is ever going to not have some sort of thing that you afterwards you kind of scratch your head. say, you know what, I wish we had done that a little bit better. And I know I've worked on ordinances in my career at the city, but now I look back and say, you know what, we really should tweak that or this or whatever. And I think that one of the things that is helpful is your willingness as a board to be open to us, very clearly just telling you we're just trying to make things better here. We're not going to get it right necessarily the first time.
I take tremendous offense to that, Madam Chair. Our board is perfect.
I'm not suggesting it's the board.
If I may, I do just want to appreciate the group of colleagues that worked on this together. One thing that I do feel like makes this better and helps us identify those things that are maybe hindrances to residents or to the city or our goals as a city overall, is the feedback and input from many departments. And I have been an advocate for interdepartmental working groups to ensure that everyone kind of has an opportunity to provide that input before we bring things to you. It won't be perfect, it's true. When I talk to planners from other cities, it is very common for people to take a second or third cut at large ordinances like this. So that's it, but I do want to appreciate all the time and energy that it takes to get here. Many hours of meetings over many months to come to agreement and work through the technical aspects of this. So thank you all.
Thank you. We certainly appreciate all the work on this as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you so much for your presentation, and we'll open it up for your public comment. Are there any members of the public present wishing to testify on this ordinance amendment? Oh. What did I do? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna call the two folks who have signed up to speak about the business public comment on the workshop. Billy Bromage. Good evening.
Good evening.
If you please state your name and address for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes to testify.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Billy Rummage. I live at 49 West Rock Avenue in Ward 25. So I'm here in support of the, thanks, I'm here in support of the tiny home resolution to pallet shelters as a one part of what needs to happen in the city of New Haven. I represent the organization Unhoused Activist Community Team, UACT. I'm sure some others are familiar. We've come in and spoken, we've met with some of you testified in the past. We support the tiny homes because they provide.
Just move it back.
Move it back a little?
Yeah.
Thank you. I heard it before. I was wondering what the tech. Thank you. There we go. So we support it as Mr. Kelly said when he was testifying that it is a desperate need right now for people. Housing is a desperate need. People are feeling anguish and stress, and living in a tent, which we know a lot of people do in the city on any given night. There's dozens of people living in tents all over the city. It only adds stress, as my friend and colleague in UAC, Joel, talked about. Just the risks of being in a tent, the trauma that it can cause people that are already struggling with lots of problems, sometimes mental health struggles, substance use struggles, to also be out in a tent and also have no idea when you might be swept away, when the police might come and take you out from your home. You might lose your belongings, you might lose your medication. It happens every week here in New Haven. So we're in an untenable situation right now. So that's why we're pushing sort of for the urgency on this issue. I've been a social worker. I am a social worker. I've been in mental health for over 30 years. 25 years of that has been here in New Haven in various services. I've seen over and over and over again the negative effects on people's lives who are just starting to get back up on their feet, just starting to recover from their struggles, when they're kicked out of a place that they live. Often, as Joel and others talked about, there's really no, so a lot of people can't stay in shelters for various reasons. It's not because they don't like it, they don't, whatever. There's a lot of really good reasons, positive reasons why people can't live in shelters. And there's a growing consensus among mental health workers that I talk to and homeless service providers that pallet villages are one part of the solution for what we need to do in the city. We need to think very creatively. I know there's real restrictions currently on zoning and all kinds of other things, building code, things like that. But we are in a crisis right now. We were here a couple of years ago talking about this issue and other things that UACT was presenting. And since that time, two of our leaders just in our group have passed away that were unhoused. One was in a shelter way out on Route 80 and died walking back here, was struck by a car. Another died in front of a doorway downtown here. And that's just a couple of people. I know my time's almost up here. I just want to end with emphasizing the urgency of this issue. We've been talking about this, UACT has been talking about this and talking about the emergency of people dying from this, from dealing with serious problems in their lives because of this issue. And it's really, the time is now to start to think of all kinds of solutions, including things like pallet shelters. And I'll just leave you with two things. One being, I really urge you to look at this if you haven't looked at it yet. This presentation was put together by the Rosette Village people. These are not sheds. The mayor and others continue to want to call these sheds to try to disparage these as a solution for people. I think that's incredibly disrespectful. And if you look at these, the shower facilities people have, the kitchens, the dignity somebody has in living in a place like this, like Julie talked about, where you can lock your door and know your belongings are safe. I really urge you to look at this and look at the cities that have built these, and that's a really affordable thing. The other thing I would encourage is to think about a moratorium on encampment sweeps. Right now, the city is just sweeping people out of their homes, very little plan. And I think we've been planning for years. Until something like this happens, until there's a safe place for everyone to go, I think it's incumbent on all of us in the city of New Haven to not sweep people out of the very minimal amount of safety and community and ability to look out for each other that they have in encampments. And I would really encourage the Board of Alders to consider what the mayor's administration will not consider, and that be a moratorium on encampment sweeps until a solution is figured out. Thank you, and I appreciate the extra time.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank
Thanks.
you so much
Thank
for
you
your
for your time.
testimony. Next, we have Fabiola Cruz. Good evening.
Good evening.
If you please state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 30 minutes to testify.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Fabiola Abelo Cruz. I'm an addiction psychiatrist by training, and I'm an assistant professor of psychiatry at Yale School of Medicine. I'm faculty co-advisor of the Hispanic Latinx Affinity Group for the psych residency. And I said that to say that my opinions are not from my institution, nor where I work in street psychiatry, CMHC. What I bring today is just my clinical experience in the last 3 years in New Haven, because prior I lived in Boston. My address is 138 College Street, Middletown, Connecticut. So I live in Middletown. I do not live in New Haven. I do work in New Haven. I'm here today just because I think about the U.S. Supreme Court decision of Grant Pass versus Johnson, right? And they ruled in favor of the city of Grant Pass allowing local jurisdiction to prohibit sleeping on public property. So when I think about that, I think what's going to happen in the next few years, because more people will be unable to live in public. And I said that I work in street psychiatry as a model of care that delivers mental health and substance use disorder in people that are unhoused, specifically unsheltered people. And the reason why I am here is I truly beg you to consider tiny homes, pallet shelters, and other similar structures as an immediate need to help housing, because there will be people that will not go to shelter. And I have here just some data of a study published in 2024 about why people are unsheltered, meaning they don't go to shelters. And they look at many studies, quality studies, meaning like what people said, but the main reasons why people do not stay in shelters. And they find 8 themes. And these are lack of safety in shelter, triggers for substance use, strict shelter rules, triggers for substance use, perceived inadequate care, unsanitary conditions, required treatment to participate in housing programs, no pet or family accommodations, and lack of accessibility for individuals with disability. So I say this because I know there will be people that will not go to shelter. I have seen it over and over and over. And we need to think about alternatives. And the last piece I will say is, I love something that was mentioned earlier, that the feedback from community members that do have experience with shelters or tiny home is needed. So again, I implore you, I beg you to consider tiny homes, pallet shelters, or similar structures as alternatives, because I know that people will still be declining shelters for personal reasons. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony. And would it be possible to take your data?
Of course, it has my notes, but yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Are there any other members of the public willing to testify on either of these items? For a second time, are there any members of the public wishing to testify on these items? And a third time, are there any members of the public present wishing to testify on these items? Alder Frillo.
Madam Chair, I move that we close the public portion of this meeting.
Second. It has moved in second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. The public portion, oh, I apologize. Nay, are there any nays? Any abstentions? The item passed. We have closed the public portion.
Madam Chair, I move that we read and file item 1.
It has been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
I'd just like to note for the record that Alder from Ward 3 has joined us. Good evening. Okay, so we've there's a motion to read and file. It's been seconded. That discussion. Thank you. Alder Frillo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wanted to thank city staff for coming out and explaining the differences and the options that we have in our city to provide additional housing for those who are currently unhoused. It is definitely one of our legislative agendas, something that we're pushing on, not just affordability, but also to provide for the residents of our city. And we appreciate the testimonies of those that have come out. Even though this is just a listening session, I'm sure there'll be other pieces of potential legislation down the road that we would need to consider and perhaps pass as an ordinance. It's a serious situation, isn't it? And so it's going to take all hands on board, all of our thoughts, our thinkers to come together. And I think that each piece is very important, whether it be pallets, whether it be the tiny homes. We have the ADUs that are before us for potential amendments. And so all of this is all pieces in the puzzle that we need to figure out, work out whatever zoning would be appropriate for what we want to do in our city. And I think that the zoning is important because of the absence of regulations, we have chaos. But I do think also that we do need to look at the zoning, and there's other things that we need to consider. So I'm just grateful that we're able to have this conversation, and I know that more conversation will be coming down the line as we're looking at this very important topic. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alderman Rashawn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm giving my support to the motion that we recommend this be read and filed, which is appropriate motion for such an item. I want to thank Alder Fairlaw for introducing this and communicating it to our board and taking leadership and making sure that we had the discussion we had this evening, which I thought was helpful. And finally, I'll just note that I heard the phrase pathway to compliance. I think I heard that from staff. I'm wondering if I heard that from the community group, maybe not. But I think that's an intriguing concept worthy of further discussion at another time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Rashawn. Yes, and included in the agenda from city staff's regulatory paths forward, and I agree.
Madam,
Alder Rodriguez.
Eli, you were gonna, okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I too am support of read and file. But I'm also, this was a very good workshop in receiving the information from the administration and also from the invitees that came and shared the other side. So it's really good because we have both sides. But most important, I think, two very important things. We have many individuals in the population of need that can afford. And the fact that the city administration is working, is looking at all sorts of alternative, our city plan department and our zoning, I think this is a very good thing for us. And if we can consider from homeless to homeowner, that would be wonderful, right? So as our city administration continues to work in this endeavor, to address, I also want to be thankful and acknowledge the last person who spoke, and that she is an expert in the field of mental health and social services, and her bringing us that data to clearly define what are some important things that affect this population, that we are also looking at addressing those toward the very goal that she is sharing that is very important, that we look at alternatives to what we have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yep. All those in favor, or are there any other questions or any other discussion? All right, all those in favor of having this item read and file, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The item passes. Read and file. Alder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move item 2.
Second.
Items have been in second discussion. Alder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We need to substitute, we need to amend this item by substitution with the information that was presented to us by Director Brown this evening.
So moved.
Second.
Item has been in second discussion. The discussion on the motion. To amend by substitution.
Well.
Alder Fairlaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we are receiving, this, I find this absolutely incredible.
Yes.
But let me speak first on, so there's a number of amendments that were presented to us, which colleagues, which city staff was very careful to go through each one of the amendments. And although I am not an expert on flood, they made it very easy to understand. And I would encourage colleagues to vote favorably for this amendment by substitution. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Fairlaw. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of amending by substitution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any attendance. So now we are back to the item as amended. Discussion.
Madam Chair.
Alder Rodriguez.
I really like what I heard from our Director Brown, that not only did she look at this ordinance carefully and diligently, but that she included other individuals from other departments to ensure that the interest of the work of each of those departments was taken into account as she helped to improve the ordinance. I like the fact about the 10-year period being as the look back period. I can appreciate that. Taking into consideration climate change and a lot of other things that are very important regarding flood. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Michelle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am speaking in favor of the motion as amended. I think the revisions make sense. And it's legislating is an iterative process. You don't necessarily get it all in one fell swoop. It sometimes takes multiple bites of the apple, so to speak, to get where you need. And I think these are prudent course corrections. We don't want the unintended consequence of our ordinance to be to do harm to our economic development. Having said that, I think it's important to remind ourselves that the primary purpose of the flood damage prevention ordinance is to prevent damage from floods. The title is somewhat descriptive of the purpose. And so when we seek the balance of how to foster and support economic development, we need to make sure that measures are taken to ensure that it's done in a way that will mitigate and hopefully prevent damage to life and to property. And so it is important for us as a committee to ask questions of the city staff in regards to the particulars that they laid out today. And I was glad to have those explanations from our technical experts, our engineer, our building official, and our zoning experts. So I think we are threading the needle, and that's our attempt, at least, our intention, to first of all protect, but second of all to facilitate growth and development. And I'm supportive of this, and I encourage colleagues to vote yes on the motion as amended. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The item passes as amended by substitution. Alder Furlow.
Madam Chair, I move that we adjourn.
Second. It is moved in second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions. Thank you so much. This meeting is adjourned.
Really?
Thank you. Thank you.
My husband's outside, can I meet, can we?
Sorry. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Not a problem.
I love seeing that. You'll love me, don't fall back, you don't call me. He said, I'll take it.